Sounds good.
All right, this is episode 30. Oh, I'm recording. Okay. This is episode 36 of Farm to Markets, and today we are talking about if you should get a trust, if now is the most dangerous time in human history, and we have more lightning round questions at the end. Ever since the federal estate tax exemption increased from 5 million to over 11 million, many people have been asking if they still need a trust. I know none of you are estate planning attorneys, but when would you refer a client to an attorney to talk about a trust?
So from my standpoint, the biggest one is if you want to protect your assets for beneficiaries, whether that is going to be a surviving spouse that you want to make sure that they have like a structured income after you die. Another one is if you have kids or grandkids, several of them that you want to provide some income for over a long period of time. And one of the benefits of this is, in many cases, trusts are protected from the creditors of the beneficiaries. So even if you want to leave some money to kids or grandkids, they can receive it without, let's say they default on a home loan or something, the creditors can't come and grab that trust. Another interesting one, I don't know if this is necessarily exactly what we were looking for, but gun trusts are pretty interesting. If you own a lot of firearms, historical ones or ones that predate, certain kinds of weapon bans, it's much easier to transfer them to beneficiaries if they're held within a gun trust than if you just owned them and had a tax stamp for, say, a suppressor or an older, pre-1986 automatic weapon, something like that. So those are just a few interesting times when you might want to use a trust, and I'll save some other bullet points for everyone else.
When it comes to trusts and wills, I like to compare them to buying your first car and buying your second car. So the will is your first car. You start with this just because you need something to drive. Always start with a living will. This makes the probate process much easier, less expensive, and it can also shield your assets from intestacy laws. Now, a trust is like buying your second car. You have to ask yourself, do you need one or do you just want one? Can you justify the expense? What are you looking for in your second car? Do you want something with a lot of room? Do you want something with high towing capacity, speed, fuel economy? So I'll list about four main situations that would make someone a good candidate for a trust. One, when your estate exceeds 12 million as an individual or 24 million for married couples. Two, when you want to be very specific about how your estate is transferred while you're still alive or after you die. Three, when your estate, business, or family relationships are very complicated. And four, when you want the nature of your estate to remain private. The appointed trustee of the trust can manage the assets in the trust instead of a more public probate proceeding. So trusts can certainly do a lot of good and do a lot of specific things, but do you need that second car or not? If the value of your estate isn't significant, if you have limited assets, your estate's pretty straightforward, then creating a trust may not be beneficial and could actually cost you more than it's worth creating. Most of the time I find this to be the case, but trusts do have a time and place and can certainly be beneficial for the right person.
I see that many of our clients have trusts that don't need them. Then I see people who don't have trusts and do need them. If the criterion I tend to use is kind of similar to Drew's, but I'll break it down as this, is that if a client wants to control the money from the grave extremely specifically, or their estate is greater than the numbers that Drew told you in terms of value, or they're trying to use one of these special private ruling options for avoiding the government, then a trust might make sense. But for most people, I think they buy trust because they think they do things that other things can't do. But the reality is that in 2022, there's lots of ways to avoid probate. You can do pay on death arrangements through your bank accounts. You can do transfer on death arrangements through your investment accounts. Many states, particularly in the western states where we live, you can use beneficiary deeds or transfer deeds for property. So avoiding probate is extremely easy in 2022 compared to what it was 30 years ago when I first got into the business. But I think that in a lot of cases, people buy trust because they're afraid of imaginary horribles. They think that things are a lot worse than they probably will actually be. Having gone through this process with a family member here recently, I will say that it's relatively easy to avoid probate. The difficulty is going to be avoiding incompetent municipal employees and financial service people who don't know what the rules are for their own state, and you have to hand walk them through, even if you do everything correct.
So I'll just say ditto for the most part. You guys pretty much covered. Maybe I'll just provide the legal disclaimer that none of us here are attorneys. And if you have questions about trust, you should consult an attorney. And the advice we're given may or may not be correct for you. I will also say is that before you do talk to an attorney, it would be good to educate yourself on the things that you can do to set up your estate without using a trust, and then just come armed with that knowledge and ask your attorney these questions. Why would I? Can I just get by with a will? Do I need a will? Can I just use payable on death? And if you kind of know, some of the jargon and know some of the things you can do without a trust, without a will, it'll make the hour that you spend with your estate planning attorney that much more informational. So, yes to all the things you guys just said, and then I would also just do a little bit of research. There's lots of information online before you go talk to your attorney. Just get the most bang for your buck.
I'll be honest with you. To me, I love Drew's analogy. I would say that a trust is kind of like buying aircraft insurance right before you get on the airplane. Is that the odds of you going down in the airplane in a crash are relatively low, but that as you're boarding the aircraft and you see that opportunity to buy that insurance, which is incredibly expensive, but the odds of you needing are relatively small, you're scared, so you feel compelled to buy it. I think a lot of people fall in that trap with trust as well.
All right, we'll move on to Noam Chomsky. And I'm not sure, I don't even know if I'm even saying that right. I think I'm saying that. It's Noam Chomsky, right?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So Noam Chomsky, most known for his work in linguistics and cognitive science, believes that we are at the most dangerous point in human history due to climate change and the threat of nuclear war. Do you agree that now is the most dangerous point in human history, or have we been at this point before? And so I will just reiterate that this is the devil's advocate round. And for today, Drew is the devil's advocate. And this does not, the opinion that Drew takes does not reflect his actual opinion. He's just trying to provide some color to our program. So this is the devil's advocate round. But Alex, do you agree with Noam Chomsky?
I think to a certain extent, yes. It is a dangerous point in human history that's approaching. Anybody who's been reading the newsletter articles that I've been writing over the last 6 months or so will know that I've been citing a lot of different analysts and research suggesting that the globalized world that we're used to is largely ending, and history as we know it is more or less going back to normal, which is probably going to be something more like a great power politics kind of a world, where you have somewhere between a half dozen and a dozen major powers capable of projecting power in both their immediate neighborhoods and to an extent around the world. Gone are likely the days of the United States standing alone atop the world, setting all the rules for everybody. And what that probably means is, as far as climate change goes, I don't think that's a threat to humanity in the way that many environmentalists think it is. I mean, humans are pretty adaptable. We've lived in much colder and much hotter environments. But anyways, going back to the security situation, the biggest concern is that as the United States backs away from the Cold War alliance network that it's built, both economically and militarily, other countries are going to start realizing that they've got to defend themselves rather than rely on somebody else halfway around the world doing it for them. And you can ask North Korea what's the easiest way to guarantee your security when you're poorer or less equipped than other nations around you, and that's to go nuclear. Right now, nuclear nonproliferation is largely keeping most countries who might want to go at one another from developing nuclear weapons. So like Iran and Saudi Arabia. The United States guarantees the Saudis' existence, both tacitly and in some cases explicitly. But if the United States is no longer interested in, putting boots on the ground to keep the Iranians from invading Saudi Arabia, for example, simplest, easiest way for the Saudis is to take some of that oil money and use it to either buy or build some nukes. Do that for basically everybody around the world, and all of a sudden you've got, not just a two-sided mutually assured destruction, but possibly several dozen, several dozen countries that have mutually assured destruction capabilities. And the more people who have them, the more likely it is that somebody's going to, turn the key or push the button or whatever analogy you want to use and start dropping bombs. So, the last 75, give or take, years in terms of world history have been incredibly peaceful. But most of world history is filled with great power conflict, one after another, after another, after another, after another. Whether they're fighting each other or fighting weaker nations in their peripheries, great powers are almost always fighting somebody, somewhere, all the time. Put nukes into the equation, and you could have a very serious problem.
100%. We are definitely approaching the most dangerous point in human history. Now, before I make my arguments as to why that is, I'd like to make a distinction from the human brain, from history to the human brain today. So the human brain adapts and it adjusts its hormone levels based on its ambient environment. We haven't had to experience the Black Plague or the Holocaust, but the most recent tragedies in terms of how our brains perceive them are certainly getting worse. So let me put this another way. I have a 2-year-old daughter, and when she loses a toy or has to eat her peas, it's the worst thing she's ever experienced, because it is. As adults, we roll our eyes and we forgive toddlers for their innocence. But right now, we are all toddlers relative to the rest of human history. And right now, we're going off the rails. Over the last few decades, despite the advances we've made in some fields, we've lost overall happiness and have created more problems within the family unit, social dynamics, the environment, and political structure. Right now, we have the most politically divided nation since the Civil War. More and more people are becoming politically charged and triggered, and they're ready to snap. Logic and reason are being replaced by identity politics and herd behavior. Overall happiness and life expectancy in the United States is decreasing. Old-fashioned family values are replaced by fast-paced family dynamics and digital media and screens. We're more lonely, despite being more globally connected. Suicide rates have never been higher. Drug abuse and drug addictions have never been higher. It's extremely difficult for younger generations to gain an economic foothold with high inflation and prohibitive work incentives. College is also more expensive relative to the purchasing power of the dollar throughout history. We've lost our sense of community, and we're abandoning spiritual places of gathering in favor of more viewership online. We continue to abuse the environment, and we're only digging the hole deeper and making it more unlikely and difficult to correct the longer we keep it up. So in summary, right now, yes, this is the most dangerous and fragile time in human history.
Since college, I've made it a personal choice to listen to what Noam Chomsky has to say, and then living my life assuming that whatever he says is exactly wrong. In fact, I can't remember one thing that Noam Chomsky has ever predicted that has actually come true. He's been bad-mouthing the American way of life for, as long as I've been an adult. And the fact of the matter is that everything that our devil's advocate said today, I can't think of a better time in history to be alive than right now. I know people who do everything wrong nutritionally. They eat hot dogs every day. They drink, a half gallon of black coffee. They sit on the TV all day, and they live to be 90 years old. I mean, what they're doing at the local hospital right now with technology just blows my mind. The life expectancy of people who basically, if you stay away from fentanyl, if you don't spend all your time on social media trying to compare yourself to other 18-year-old girls, life is actually pretty gosh darn good. Fuel efficiencies, even in farming, my latest hobby, I watch YouTube videos, and the technology and the ability to share ideas has never been as strong as it is right now. The yields that you can get as an individual gardener or as an individual farmer has never been as good as it is right now. Whenever I have new clients come in to kick the tires on us, I always ask them this question. I say, is that looking at the outlook for the American economy, do you think this is the best time? And I'm sorry, is this the worst time in history? I mean, all the things that Drew said, where he basically talks about why this is the worst time in history. And I can see people getting really scared about investing. Then I'll say, or do you think this is the best time in history? Man, over here at Logan Healthcare, our local hospital, they can do non-invasive surgery and take a kidney out through a little bitty hole next to your belly button and take the kidney out and you can be out of the hospital in a day. When I first came here, folks that went in for hip replacements, they had to go down to the Lutheran Home nursing facility for 3 weeks to recover. Now you have the operation at 6 o'clock in the morning and they kick you out of the hospital at 2 o'clock and you're walking by the next day. Noam Chomsky is emphatically wrong, like he always is, and there's never been a better time in history than right now. No, we're not going to die as a result of climate change, and no, nuclear war is no worse now than it was in the 1950s.
I agree. Is that I guess I'll take more of like this is kind of like being in the the investing industry, is that we see stuff like this all the time. It's never been worse times for the stock market. It's never been more volatile. It's never been whatever you want to put at the end of that sentence. But it's always like that. I've been doing this for over 10 years now, and every year I've been here, we're always right up against the right at the cusp of some terrible thing happening. And bad things happen over the last 10 years and bad things have happened before I got it, and bad things will happen over the next 10 years. And it's the same thing. Like Stephen Hawking wrote an article in the Economic Times in 2016 titled, "This is the most dangerous time in the history of humanity." And I'm sure the people during the Cold War, when we were going head to head with Russia, trying to blockade Cuba, thought that was the most dangerous time in history. So this is just one of those things where it's like I can go back and if I Google stock market crisis, I can find articles going all the way back to the 80s to the early 90s, and they all basically say the same thing. And this is just a repeat of things that we've seen before. So if history is our guide, then we've been here before, and this is not the most dangerous time. It's just we're just reliving another time where things seem dangerous.
Evidently, you guys aren't comparing yourselves to 18-year-old girls like I am, evidently.
Well, you do have that Greta Thunberg poster and shrine at your house.
That's right.
All right, we'll move on to the lightning round. So mass timber, or wood that has been glued and pressed together, is being used to construct buildings. These buildings are purported to be more environmentally friendly, cheaper, and faster to build. Would you have any issues living in an 80-story skyscraper made from wood?
Well, I guess it depends on how old it is, because everything I know about these wooden skyscrapers is that they wear out faster, they warp, they are higher maintenance in comparison to steel and concrete. I think the main selling point in a lot of these cases has been that it's got a lower carbon footprint. I'd be interested to see some math on, how often do you have to replace these buildings versus a steel and concrete building, and see if there's actually any real carbon benefit to it.
It's not so much the building material. I don't want to live in an 80-story skyscraper, period. I want to live in a 1980s farmhouse, overlooking the mountains.
Ditto to what Drew said. I can't see myself living in an 80-story apartment complex where I couldn't farm and raise animals.
Yeah, I guess I trust the engineers that build these things, but you're right. If this is an old building, then I'm probably going to have some concerns about it. But to what Drew and Joe said is that anytime there's there's a hurricane or an earthquake, or a tornado or something like that, I would rather not be in a skyscraper than and rather be just in like a single family home. All right, before the pandemic, businesses were already dropping the more formal dress code in favor of more casual ones, and the pandemic seemed to accelerate this trend. Do you think casual workwear is here to stay, or will we see a return to more formal attire?
I think it's here to stay. Some companies may try and revert to it, but I think the management of a lot of those companies are going to realize they're no longer competing with other local companies, but they're competing with people's couches now for a workspace. And I think I saw that Goldman Sachs dropped their suit and tie requirement for most of their employees. A lot of companies like that have been as well. I don't think dressing up, quote unquote, is gone forever, but as far as, you know, the suit and tie as being the norm for office workers is probably a thing of the past.
Yeah, I guess like Alex said, I don't think it's gone forever. I think it's a thing of the past right now and maybe for this next trend. But I think fashion trends repeat themselves and eventually formal attire will come back.
Today is Wednesday. Besides the associates who work at Cocoa Enterprises, the only people wearing coat and ties in the entire valley are the attorneys in front of judges this afternoon. Doctors don't wear coats and ties around here. Attorneys don't wear coats and ties. What's interesting is when I first came to town, I was told to drop the coat and tie, but because they said this is Montana, and Montana were rather informal. But the fact is that prior to the 1970s, even Kalispell and Whitefish, the butcher wore a tie, the postman wore a tie, and just about every store owner wore a tie. This whole idea of going informal, not only are we going informal with coats and ties, we're also going informal with our language. Profanity is up to an all-time high in the workplace. Is that we have this real informal feeling in our culture right now. And I think that every time you swing to an extreme at one end, to Drew's point, we'll just swing back to the other end extreme at some point in our time. Whether it happens in this generation or not, it'll come back to formality at some point.
You know, it's definitely regional, but I don't see us going back to a time when everybody's, you know, the mailman's wearing a coat and tie, and you know, the milkman's got a tie on. I don't see that happening. I think it's going to stay rather informal. Obviously not at Cocoa Enterprises, but I just think as a whole, I don't think we're going back to a time where, you know, everybody gets when people go out on Sundays, they're wearing their nicest Sunday attire. I don't think we're going to see that anymore. All right, Amazon has been working on its drone delivery program for a while. However, the rollout has been delayed after one of its drones crashed and started a small brush fire. Do you think this will be Amazon's primary method of delivery in the future, or is this just an expensive novelty?
Well, depending on how far in the future you want to look, you know, maybe, who knows? But for now, I think they're more novelty than anything. The more companies that try and roll this out, I mean, imagine like 3 or 4 different delivery companies with drones flying all over the place, pizza delivery companies, you know, any delivering food, prescription drugs, whatever. I mean, at a certain point, the skies are going to get pretty crowded with little buzzing drones, and I don't think too many people will like them flying all over the place. I instead see more like self-driving trucks or something like that pull up in front of your house or your apartment complex. You scan your phone or whatever, and you grab your box and go. I think that's a more reasonable prediction for the near and medium term future.
I could see them being a preferred method someday. I don't know how soon, but I could see that happening.
As long as government regulation makes human labor expensive or impossible, that increases the odds of things like drone delivery actually happening. So you don't have to pay payroll taxes on a drone, and you don't have state minimum wages for drones. So who knows, maybe as a result of trying to get labor to work again, the government may come back and tax drones. But if drones are less expensive than human capital because of regulation, we're going to see drone activity at some time in our lifetime.
I agree. Yeah, if they get cheaper, Amazon's got some safety issues they have to work out, and I'm also worried, is that how vandalism is going to play a role in this. If you get some guy with wild hair out there shooting drones down, is that going to increase the cost for for securing these drones? And then also if you get enough drones out there, you're going to have a lot of sky pollution where you look up and all you see is drones hovering around, and that would create additional safety issues. So I think there's a lot of work to be done before this happens. Right now, it's just a novelty. All right, well, that's it for episode 36 of Farm to Markets. Remember, if you want us to talk about something, please go ahead and either leave it in the comments or send us an email. Appreciate people that have been giving us topics, and we'll see you next week.